Okay, so before we start our session, right? Hello. Yeah. Okay. Let's start our session, and as people will come on, and we'll kind of go along with that. So I welcome you all to the session of the Jenkins. So before giving my brief introduction, so I would like to ask you, means who all are into the sysadmin kind of a role, or who are dealing with the code stuff, pushing onto the live server. So is there anyone who is into that kind of a role? Or who is basically reviewing the code on a daily basis kind of a thing where the peer reviews are there? Yeah? So who all are the developers here? Okay. Fine. Now, so I'll start with the slides, and then we can just go on to the more practical things. Okay, my name is Ritesh Gurung. I am Director Technologies working at Srijan Technologies Private Limited. Twitter handle is @Leozo. Now, before we discuss about the Jenkins things, so let me share a short story, right? So once there was a sort of a king who was kind of very concerned about his people. So what he proposed was to kind of give a sort of a common task so that they can perform those tasks on their own will. Now, when this simple task was given, so everyone was kind of invited into that, and as the people from different community and different culture, they started to do those tasks, and they kind of did their task, or sort of I should say they were able to complete the task, but the method that they were following in completing the task was totally different from one another. Yeah. Because it was kind of an open thing, so everyone was kind of invited. Now, since everyone needed to understand how they have completed a task, so there needs to be a common language so that each and every person can understand, yeah, this was the way that this particular task was done. Now, this is what exactly the Drupal is about, right? So we need to have a sort of a common coding standards that we follow. And plus, as the development is going on, right, so we must adhere to certain standards that Drupal has established in terms of the coding, in terms of how we actually put our sites and how we kind of evaluate our sites, right? So there are a couple of things like we must follow the W3 standards. The coding standards are all already there on the drupal.org. I'll not get into the nitty-gritty of that. The things that really bothers while developing the site is the kind of the performance and how my code is actually doing whenever, let's say, I'm committing on a daily basis. I'm sure you must be using some kind of a version repository, maybe a Git or SVN, right? Now, the thing is, how do I make sure that whatever the code that I'm committing, right, does it make sense to commit that code? Is it kind of really affecting my performance? So those kind of things. So for that, I have the agenda about what the Jenkins is about and why we think the Jenkins is required. Next thing is how can we use the Jenkins in a Drupal way, right? And then after that, we'll go into the automation and the continuous integration kind of stuff. Now, let me share exactly what the Jenkins is. Now, this Jenkins is a program that is, or a software that is written in Java, and it's an open source, so you can very well tweak and you can create the plugins of your own to suit your needs. So it's a kind of a continuous integration software which takes care of your daily check-in codes, the functionality as they are built into the software or the system that you're building in. The second thing is it provides you with a nice feedback about the checking the performance of the site during the process of the development. So as you are developing the site, so you might want to know whether the code that I'm pushing in, will it really affect my site, right? The second thing, or the last thing, is about communicating whatever the result or whatever the test cases that were written, or whatever the W3 standard, whether it's following. So to provide a kind of a report to the team or the concerned team who are working on that development part, right? So ultimately it all evolves around the development that we are into, and there is a large community around this Jenkins, and there are lots of plugins that are available. So you can very well use them, and that suits your kind of a need. So let me explain you what are the merits of using the Jenkins. So let's consider a scenario where I have to do a kind of a monotonous job where daily I have to go through the logs, check whether there is certain spamming that is coming in, block those IPs, right? Or it could be as good as like checking the codes within the system, whether they are adhering to the Drupal standards or not, right? And as I explained earlier, that the performance part, right? Whether my performance is increasing or it's decreasing. So those kind of monotonous job that every company has a sort of a sysadmin to report into, so they kind of get into those things and generate a report, and maybe probably they'll take at least 2 or 3 days before they come up with a report. And by the time they come up with a report, so that code has already been integrated into the system, right? The second thing is it also handles the cron tasks, the cron jobs that are created, right? Wherein the next thing is about the dependency on one person. So let's say if there is a sort of a sysadmin who is kind of engaged in doing all kind of a server admin kind of a thing, right? And suppose he is sick and he doesn't turn back into some kind of a urgent situation or during the urgency. So at that time, what happens is that particular process is stalled. Yeah. So it removes the dependency on one person, right? So anybody with the access can easily execute or carry out those processes. And it also helps you to deploy, let's say if you have, I'm sure you must be following the dev, staging, and kind of a production environment kind of a thing, right? Now, it also helps you to push your code from development environment to the staging, and from staging to the production environment, right? So that you have kind of a check at every stage, what are the different things that needs to be done, right? Then the QA task that I said earlier, it's kind of a, the Selenium test cases, or maybe some regression testing using Siege or Apache Benchmark kind of a thing. So that can be performed. The performance evaluation as the site grows. So you may want to evaluate how my site is performing, right? And also check the W3C standards. So what are the different possibilities in which I can integrate the Jenkins to Drupal? Yeah, so let's see around what are the different things. So what are the different Drupal rituals that we perform in, right? So let's say if I have to start up with a fresh thing. So what are the things that we cover? So first of all, we create a new DB, install and configure the new Drupal instances, and then configure the instance, be it in terms of configuring the admin, the email, and time zone settings. So those are the kind of things that I think takes at least 10 to 15 minutes of your time before it gets into real, right? Then the regular tasks like clearing the cache on a regular interval, taking the backup of the DB, taking the backup of all the virtual hosts that and entries that you have. So these are the different Drupal rituals that you know. So is any other thing that you do on a regular basis? Yeah. On a Drupal site? Is there any other regular thing that you always keep track?
We commit code daily.
Okay. What else? So we check performance, we check the W3 standards, and right. I think these are the things that we really get into while we are into the Drupal side. So a person or a team who is doing these things alone, right? And that's kind of a monotonous job that he will have to go through all these things over and over again. So he'll get kind of mad at these things, right? Ultimately, that person will be bored. So how about automating? So when the same person, right, who is kind of spending his time on this monotonous job, so what if he spends his time on more productive things other than these, right? So which are sort of a constructive to the company and which is kind of a constructive to the member who is doing this. Okay, so I'll just get into the what exactly the Jenkins is about, and I'll just help you out in a few of the things that you can do within the Jenkins, right? I hope it's visible, right? Basically what I've done is I've started the service of the Jenkins, right? So to install it, it's very easy on Ubuntu. You get this within apt-get install Jenkins. Before that, you have to add the PPA repository, which all written in the jenkinsci.org, right? So you can refer that. So this is the web interface of the Jenkins, right? And here we have the different kind of things like we have, so everything in here is treated as a job, right? So whenever we are creating a new task, it's treated as a job so that we can keep track of what are the things that happened in our day, right? So as you can see, I have created 3 different jobs. One is to take the backup of the DB, one is to take the backup of all the virtual hosts, and the last one is related to execute the cron jobs on the Drupal side, right? Now, so if we can just, I hope I'm audible, right? There at the back, yeah. Okay, so if we click on any of the job, or let's start with this thing. So if I create a new job, so first thing that I have to do is to name the job, right? So let's say we'll start with backup DB, right? So there are few other options, so but we'll go with this freestyle, yeah. And here I can just write down the description like okay. Now what I can do is I can add a build step which will execute a shell script, right? So it can be as good as executing a shell script from your interface only. Yeah. So to do that, what I'll do is I hope you all use Drudge command. Yeah? Okay. Cool. So what I have done is I have just referenced this -r, which is basically to reference the document root of the Drupal site. Yeah. And I have used a SQL dump command which is already available as Drudge command. Piped that and created a bzip2 of that and redirected it to temp db_sql.bz2, right? So I'll just save this, right? Now this is kind of a manual thing, right? So every time I have to go to this, I'll just go click on build now. Yeah. And if you can just go to the console output, here you will see that this building process started, right? Now this is the kind of the log that we always look into, right? So let's say if that was a kind of a normal cron job, so there was no way that you could have got into those logs that describe what exactly the problem is. So here you can very well see that this SQL dump command needs a higher bootstrap level. So what does this mean, this SQL dump command needs a higher bootstrap level? Can anyone point out that? So this is an error, right? But what exactly is this? Okay, so this is more related to the document root that we have specified, right? So it doesn't exist in there. Yeah, and what we are trying to do is to create a sort of a SQL dump out of Drupal or the document root which doesn't have a Drupal installation. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the parameters and let's see what happens after that. Okay, as you can see now this command has executed perfectly and you can see the finish status is success, right? Now if I go into the log of this particular job, I'll be able to see what are the jobs that have succeeded or what are the different jobs that have failed. So you can see here we have the list of what are the different jobs that were executed and when was the last job that was kind of a succeeded, right? So this is a very proper way, or to a novice user who really doesn't know about the server things, right? So what I meant is anybody who is kind of not into the sysadmin kind of role, but still has a sort of authority, he can very well execute these things without knowing the nits and grits of the servers. Yeah. So this is the same backup that was taken using that command. Now this is a kind of a manual intervention wherein every time I have to take the backup, I have to go into the uh, Jenkins, at least Jenkins web interface to get these things executed. How about automating these things so that um, let's say every 11 o'clock, every day 11 o'clock, these things are executed on its own, right? So we have a build trigger also, which basically takes the format of what you refer in the cron job, right? So the very first statement means that every 10 minutes, right? So this thing is going to be executed. So it's a sort of a configuring the cron from without getting into the system using the interface, yeah? So in that a pretty cool thing means without getting into the SSH details of the server, but still you are able to perform the tasks that normally requires your SSH login. So as you can see, here is the build history, yeah. And let's see the console output. What are the things? So we have that different errors that are coming in. Now, Jenkins has a very good integration with the Git and SVN also, right? So you can always configure the Jenkins to check out the code from the Git repository, yeah, and then perform sort of a benchmarking on those code before they are committed and generate a sort of a nightly report on that. And then send out those reports to the concerned team. So these are the different things that can be done within the Jenkins. So I'll not get into those kind of things right now because we are not we are less of time right now. Yeah. So I would like to ask you guys, means if you have any sort of queries or the questions regarding the Jenkins and the stuffs that can be means done with this. So if there could be certain things that in which Jenkins won't make any sense, right? So would really like to know from you guys. Yeah.
Couple of questions. So, the current scenario of the infrastructure in our workspace right now, as you already know, is like we have a dev environment and different environments.
Yeah.
So, so I was thinking like maybe we could use Jenkins to leverage from migrations from the dev deployment from dev to integration at least for now. So the scenario is that on the integration servers, the SQL servers are different and the file servers are different. So can you be louder?
Do we have some mics? I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So.
I'll repeat that, right?
Yeah. Maybe you can repeat it on the live. So, as I mentioned, the SQL servers are different on a different environment, and the file servers are different. So, can we leverage Jenkins there, or is there a requirement that the SQL server should be SQL also should be on the same server, file server?
Okay. So yeah. Okay. So I'll just repeat the question. So what Baid is referring to is they have a kind of environment where they have the dev, staging, and the production environment, right? Now they have the MySQL server running on a different server, the Drupal instance is running on a different server, and the file system is on different server, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now
There's a mount point for the.
okay, so these are all mounted on this, the file system, right? Yeah, so as I referred, means it's very much, these are the things that Jenkins take care of. So let's say if you have to move your DB from production to dev, right? Or dev to production, that is one scenario, yeah? Second scenario could be you have to sync the files from the dev to your staging, or maybe from staging to the production, or the vice versa. So these are the different scenarios that I can think of in case of the Drupal kind of a thing. Now, how does Jenkins fits within this is, see all the commands, the Drudge commands, right? So these are the things that are sort of helping tools for the Jenkins. So now if we are able to use the Drudge, means as I explained, the SQL dump command is there, and there is sync command is also there, right? And SQL sync is also there. So you can use these command, the sync command, to basically sync the dev environment to the production, and production to the dev. And so there is always, it's always better to keep Drudge RC command, right? Because that is a kind of a resource file which takes care of from where the data needs to be pulled in, and from where all the parameters that are related to, let's say, the file folder or the document root, all those kind of a thing. So those are the things that you have to check in. Otherwise, you can simply issue the MySQL dump command referring the name of the source, or you can always refer back to the username, password, and the host entries, and from where that is the source and where you want to dump it. So either you directly want to sync it to the production environment, or you want to dump it or take the backup of that, right? So that is one scenario.
The SQL, the files, and the Drupal, Drupal site being on different physical servers is not going to be a blocker if you use.
No way. Unless or until they are restricting the ports, kind of a thing, right? So that. But what I'd like to say here is, so Jenkins is just a tool, right? So all the things that can be done with the Jenkins. So it can be as good as including the Capistrano, right, or the rake file. All those things can be done, right? So Jenkins will you can treat Jenkins as a web interface or kind of a speaker to all those kind of stuff, or the tasks that can be performed.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So currently we are using Jenkins to manage our business processes in the company. So let's have an example. So we have received any inquiry, and CMS has to respond to that particular inquiry in like a particular time, like half an hour or 1 hour. And like if CMs or the customer relationship officers are not able to reply to that particular inquiry in that much time, then in Jenkins we manage and we send a particular email to the quality controller or that particular customer relationship officer saying you have so many minutes left to reply to this inquiry, or like if the inquiry get delayed or something, then we have different roles where we send the emails. So my question here, I just wanted to know if we can also integrate Jenkins plugin with some SMS kind of thing or something of that sort. Is it something like anybody has done, or like is it available?
So I hope you are asking about, means you have a sort of a escalation matrix, right? So where let's say an email comes in, and then if it isn't replied within the span of time, then it gets escalated, or before that a reminder goes to the concerned person, right?
Yeah,